It's good to see you all this evening. We thank you for being here at the close of this beautiful day, and made even better by the chance to come together and study from God's Word. In this Wednesday night class, we are studying the miracles of Jesus, and we continue that study tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about two miraculous episodes, similar in the sense that both involved feeding multitudes of people. Very often when we talk about the miracles of Jesus, we talk about feeding the 4,000, feeding the 5,000. We're going to talk about both of those tonight in our study. So the first of the episodes that we want to discuss is actually mentioned in all four of the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you're looking at your study guide, you'll see the scripture references. We're not going to read all of those, but we might jump around a little bit and draw in some extra points. I thought it was interesting that in this first instance, the feeding of 5,000 plus people, I thought it was kind of interesting that it's mentioned in all four gospel accounts. Now, the second one is only mentioned in two. But I have to believe that this miracle sort of stood out amongst all the miracles, just overwhelmingly amazing. It seems to me like potentially this one sort of stood out as extra special. And as we read the details of it, I think you can probably imagine, wow, this is incredible. Really incredible what Jesus did. Supernatural power, obviously. All right, so before we read the actual account, let's talk about where this first feeding of 5,000 took place. Let's go to Mark 6. Mark chapter 6, beginning at verse 27. So we won't read all that preceded this about Herod and John the Baptist. If you look at verse 17, Mark 6:17, Herod himself had sent forth, laid hold upon John, bound him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. And so this is the situation. Let me make sure. I'm going to make sure I got my phone off. I just thought about that. Probably didn't turn my phone off. I didn't. Maybe the rest of you need to check that too. Herod had put John in prison because John boldly brother's wife. Now you remember that you know the story, how that Herodias' daughter danced before Herod. She pleased him. He offered whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. She conferred with her mother, who was obviously mad that John the Baptist had condemned their actions. And her mother told Herodias, you go back and ask for the head of John the Baptist. And she did, okay? So let's pick up that reading in Mark 6:27. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought, and he went and beheaded him, John the Baptist, in the prison, and brought his head in a charger and gave it to the damsel, and the damsel gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard of it, they came and took up his corpse and laid it in a tomb. And the apostles gathered themselves together unto Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. He said to them, come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while, for there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. And they departed into a desert place by ship privately. All right, so this episode, now Mark's account of the feeding of the 5,000 immediately follows, beginning at verse 34. So this I asked the question, where did this occur? It occurred in a desert or a remote place. And I thought was kind of interesting what prompted Jesus to go there. So when the apostles came to Jesus, told him all things, and talked about what they had done, what they'd been teaching, but you have to believe included in that was the news that John the Baptist has been executed by Herod. This is a sad moment. You would have to think this would be a particularly sad, because Jesus had praised John the Baptist. Of those born among women, none greater than John the Baptist, Jesus said. John the Baptist was just amazingly great person. And when Jesus received the news of that, along with other news as well, you have to think that was a particularly sad point in time. And so he said, come with me, come on, let's go to a place where we can rest a little. They hadn't had so much leisure as to even eat on regular intervals, and they departed to a desert place by ship privately. There's been some points made about it. First of all, I think you sort of see the human side of Jesus in that. Not unlike what we studied a few weeks ago when Lazarus had died and Jesus wept. Here, I got to believe that Jesus probably struck him pretty hard to hear about the death of John the Baptist. Jesus knows the big picture, right? Jesus understands all the eternal ramifications, but still, on the human side, on his human side, this would be a grievous thing to accept the news of John being executed, especially in the fashion that he was. And so let's go away. Let's go rest a little while. Some points have been made about the fact that is not a bad thing in and of itself. You know, is it appropriate for us to ever sort of just wind down and take a little rest? Yeah. For us, it's much different, I think, than generations who have preceded us through the centuries. We don't work near as hard as the people who went before us worked. Our forefathers, really a couple of generations back, our forefathers would have worked from sunrise to sunset just to make ends meet, just to have enough food on the table for the family. We don't work nearly as hard. We have much more leisure time, and so this point maybe doesn't register as much with us. But they didn't have so much time as to even eat on a regular schedule. And Jesus said, let's go rest a while. That's not a bad thing. Let's go rest a while. That in itself is not a bad thing. All right. So let's skip back to Matthew 14. Let's look at Matthew's account of this. Any of them are good. Let's just read Matthew's account of the feeding of the 5,000. Matthew 14:15. Well, just to tie this into the previous text we just read, look at verse 13. Matthew 14:13. When Jesus heard of it, and the immediate context is the death of John the Baptist. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by a ship to a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. But Jesus said to them, they need not depart, give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled. And they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. All right, so this desert place, I think when we read the word desert place, we think of something like the Sahara Desert. This is just a deserted place. This is a remote, outlying place. This is not near to a city of any significant size. And so notice the time is now past. It was evening. So this was just a one-day thing so far, apparently. When it was evening, verse 15, the disciples came saying, this is a desert place. The time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go in the villages and buy victuals. So they've been with him throughout the day, and it's evening. They haven't eaten. They haven't even taken a break from Jesus teaching them and healing the sick all day long. You need to send them away now. We don't have anything to feed them, and they're going to need food. These people will certainly be hungry. She said, no, we don't need to send them away. You feed them. And they said, all we got is 5 loaves and 2 fishes. That's all we got. Now, if you think about that, so We'll talk about the actual number of people involved here in a minute, but let's just take the 5,000 number. You got 5,000 people and you got 5 loaves, so you got to divide one loaf up into 5,000. 1,000. You got to divide one loaf up into 1,000 bits, and everybody gets a crumb. No, that's not what happened. Notice it says they did all eat and were filled, verse 20. So this was a multiplication of the food. The food miraculously was multiplied into a massive amount of food. So all the people ate, and they didn't eat just a tiny little bite. They ate until they were full. And then after they had all eaten to their fill, they took up what was left over, and there remained 12 baskets full. There was way more when they got done than when they started and everybody had eaten to their fill. Now, how do you do that? So to the skeptics who are always trying to figure out some sort of naturalistic explanation of the miracles, that's what modernism does. The modernist says there's an explanation. There's a natural explanation for everything that seems like a miracle. They're not really miracles. There's always some sort of natural. What's the natural explanation? There isn't one, is there? There's no way. And again, this is not something that one guy saw. 2 people witnessed this. No, the thousands of people witnessed this event. And so that when the news of this is circulating, nobody can say, "Oh, come on, that's not true." Nobody really saw that. That didn't really happen. Oh yeah, we got thousands of people who were there and actually participated in what was going on. So this is again in that important realm of verification, that the miracles that Jesus performed were verifiable. That's really, really important. Any thoughts here so far? Any comments you want to add? Y'all off quiet. All right, Carol.
How many people do you think were actually there?
Well, let's talk about that. Down here in verse 21, they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. So we always say the feeding of the 5,000. There were obviously way more than 5,000 people here, right? So what would you imagine? So of the 5,000 men, how many would you guess were married men? I don't know. Let's say half of them were married. So if half of them were, that's 7,500 people. Now among the married people, how many of them had children? And of children, how many did they likely have? Well, let's say that, so we got 2,500 married people. Let's say that on average, they would have had at least 2 children, probably more. So that's another 5,000. So we've got the number up, 7,500 and another 5,000 is going to put us up, 13,000 or thereabouts? What was it, 12,500, Clayton? 12,005. Way more than 5,000, right? We always say feeding of the 5,000, but there was clearly a lot more people than that. This is just an amazing, incredible thing that Jesus did. Any other comments? All right. So there's John includes an interesting little extra detail. We always say all these accounts are complementary; they're not contradictory. In John's account, in John chapter 6, verse 7, when he had told them to feed the people, Philip said, "Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat?" Verse 6, this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. And so in John's account, one of the disciples says, man, it would take. So if you're reading a newer version, it probably says denarii, 200 denarii. And that was what an average working man made, a daily wage. Gary?
What's interesting in John's account is verse 5, because he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? The other accounts, the apostles were asking him, but in John's account, Jesus asked Philip.
Yeah. It's interesting. And again, I don't think that's contradictory, but just sort of supplemental information. I think you're right. Wait.
So my version says, Philip answered, half a year's wages wouldn't buy enough bread for them.
Yours says half a year's wages. So so this is what I was about to say. So if a denarii was what an average working man made for a day's work, so 200 denarii would probably be more. Well, they would no doubt work a 6-day week. So this would be 30, almost 40 weeks pay. So it would be over a half a year's wage for a working man. So it would have been a significant amount of money just to buy enough. He says for them to have a little, just to have a little. So this was again pretty incredible. So they started with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and after all was said and done, they ended up with 12 baskets full. Way more than what they had when they started. Now, here's the thing that I really want us to investigate, the last question in that section. On the following day, when the people found Jesus again, why did he refuse to feed them? Okay, so this is John. We're in John's account right now, okay? And in John 6, Jesus was overwhelmingly popular with the masses of people. Notice verse 15, when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. So this goes to some of what Josh was talking about, the premillennialist doctrine. He was talking about in his sermon Sunday night. The premillennialists argue that when Jesus came the first time, he intended to set up an earthly kingdom, but he couldn't. He intended to set up an earthly kingdom, but the Jews overwhelmingly rejected him. And instead of being coronated a king, he was crucified like a criminal. And so the plan B had to be put in place. The church is plan B. And we're just holding time now until Jesus can come back and set up his earthly kingdom. Now there's a lot more to premillennialism than that, but that's part of it. Well, all that in itself, just that little part that we just described, is not true, right? They were ready to make Jesus a king. It was Jesus who didn't want to be made an earthly king. You remember in John 18, when he was before Pilate, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. So premillennialism is way off on lots of counts, but it's off on that count too. All right, so Jesus departs. Verse 16, when even was now come, his disciples went down into the sea, entered into the ship, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. It was dark. Jesus was not come to them. Remember, we won't read all this, but remember, this is the walking on the water episode. So Jesus joins his disciples in the boat, but gets there by walking on the water. By the way, we already discussed that miracle in the course of our study. Anyway, verse 24, when the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, neither his disciples, they also took shipping and came to Capernaum seeking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said, Rabbi, when camest thou? Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give to you. For him hath God the Father sealed. So the next day, again, Jesus had gone all the way across the Sea of Galilee, was on the other side. they were intent on following him. They got in ships and followed him. When they found him in Capernaum, they said, well, how'd you get here? And Jesus didn't really deal with that. But what he said is, he knew, because he can read the hearts of men, right? He knew that they weren't coming for the spiritual values that Jesus was imparting. He says, you've come because you did eat of the loaves and the fishes and were filled. Now, it's a long chapter, and we won't read all of that. But by the time you get down to verse 66, John 6:66, from that time many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. And in all of that, Jesus did not feed them again. He did not offer them the food. He perceived that they had come for more food, and he didn't feed them when that was his understanding. Now, the point that we want to make from all of that is that in our day and time, a lot of religious groups have a view, some of our own brethren have the view that, and they'll even say it this way, you got to feed the physical man so that you'll have a chance to teach the spiritual man. And so what they do, what so many religious groups, and again, sadly, some of our own brethren, what they do, they use what I like to refer to as carnal appeals, worldly appeals. Come, we'll feed you. Come, we'll entertain you. Come, we'll play ball together. And they even build big facilities in order to accomplish that, because the idea is we got to draw them with something physical. We got, just like the food, Jesus fed them. And then he also taught them. Well, actually, they've got it backwards, right? He taught them first and fed them later. There's no indication that even initially they came with any, on that first day, there's no indication that they came with any understanding that they were going to be fed. At the end of the day, the disciples said, it's evening time, send them away so they can go buy some food. They did not come with an anticipation of being fed. Jesus didn't use food to draw them the first day. The second day, when he was aware that they had come for food, he wouldn't feed them. Now, I think that in itself is enough to tell us that this approach that a lot of religious groups want to use, draw them in, draw them with food, draw them with fun and games, draw them with entertainment. Because we got to draw them with something, and then when they come, we'll try to drop a little gospel on them. If that's what you think, you're not going to be able to support it from this story of what Jesus did, right? Comments, anybody?
I can admit in this audience that I've participated in that several times, both in the planning phase and just participating in it. And I can report, without a doubt, I don't remember one conversion as a result of it.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a lot of hours and resources expended for that purpose. And the main memories I have from it is more, glad having and backslapping each other on a wonderful job we did. But at the end of the day, not one soul saved.
That's
see 100 new faces.
That's an amazing report that you just gave. I really appreciate that. I think, and so you're speaking from experience. Yeah.
I've been one of the primary organizers of things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, at the end of it, looked back and thought, well, Sunday morning, I didn't see anyone that came to our Saturday,
Yeah.
or a week later,
Yeah.
you know.
Really interesting, Paul. Good. Great report. Did you have a thought, Gary?
As far as here, Jesus is great.
Yeah.
Because he was teaching spiritual. And they were thinking about their forefathers back in the wilderness. They was fed manna every day. That was a fit with the food that perished.
Yeah.
So, but Jesus was for the spiritual.
That's right. That's right. Sarah.
Not about that topic, but included in there were 3 out of the 4 accounts when he was about to break the bread and give it to him. It says that he looked up to heaven and blessed the bread. You think we got more of a precedence to look up to heaven when we pray? Less powerful.
I think that you can't mandate bow your head, look up, close your eyes, open your eyes, kneel, stand, sit, because there's no consistency in that. So I don't think you can say there's one position or one approach to the physical, how we, even, oh man, he didn't close his eyes. Well, how do you know? You must have had your eyes open if you realize he didn't close his eyes. But I don't think there's any mandate on it because there's no consistent pattern. If it was always the same, we could say so. Yeah. Clayton.
It's kind of random, but I remember thinking, why is this kid walking around with 2 raw fish? And so we were watching a show, and they were showing that they're on the sea, some of the old ruins, that they found huge areas where they're smoking fish. And so it's most likely a smoke preserve.
Yeah,
fish.
this was these fish. I know when we were overseas, this was common. I know in Russia they would sell these dried fishes. They were the whole fish, head, tail, fins, and all. And the people would just tear the meat off that and eat it like it was candy. Oh, but that's common. I'm sure that's what this was. These weren't raw fish. These were probably smoked or some way preserved. All right. Okay, let's go to the other. Okay, so that's the feeding of the 5,000, which was undoubtedly way more than that, but we always say feeding of the 5,000. So let's go to the feeding of the 4,000. I think it's kind of interesting that this follows pretty closely in Matthew's account. It's in Matthew 15. The previous episode was in chapter 14. So you get the idea that probably these two episodes weren't separated by a whole lot of time. So look in chapter 15 at verse 32. Matthew 15, verse 32. Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude. Well, let's back up a minute. Let's start at verse 30. Great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, and the maimed to be whole, the lame to walk, the blind to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they continue with me now 3 days, and have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. And his disciples say unto him, Whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude? Then Jesus said unto them, How many loaves have ye? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. He took the 7 loaves and fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And he sent away the multitude, and took ship, and came into the coast of Magdala. Sarah, that what you asked, I think it's interesting. Like here in verse 36, he gave thanks and brake it to them. I had someone ask, people will ask questions about things that you never even consider. Why do you all always pray before you eat? Where's the Bible for that? Thinking that maybe they've caught us observing some human tradition, but we're following the pattern of Jesus here, right? Bless the bread before we eat it. That is biblical. That's Jesus did that. All right, so in this case, notice in verse 32 that they had been with him 3 days. They continue with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. So 3 days they'd been. Now this group of people is definitely there, seems like, because they're interested in what Jesus is teaching, right? They haven't left. For 3 days they've been there listening to him teach. He feels compassion. In fact, he said, I'm not going to send them away without anything to eat. I think they might faint in the way. They'd be weak, physically weak, from having not eaten. We got to get them something to eat. Wade?
What you said a while ago. I had a guy ask me one time, where's the authorization for one person to pray and the other people not to pray?
Yeah.
Well, here it is.
Yeah, it's right here. Yeah, good point. All right. So again, I think it's interesting that this episode had been going on for 3 days. Again, they weren't there with the expectation that they were going to be fed. They came to get food. No, they didn't even think about food. And they were clearly focused on what Jesus was teaching and doing, and had stayed with him 3 days. Now, in this instance, notice verse 38, that this is 4,000 men besides women and children. So we talk about the feeding of the 5,000, we talk about the feeding of the 4,000. But again, in this case, there were clearly more than 4,000 people, right? There were 4,000 men. There were also women and children. So, again, there are probably single women there, women who were married to some of the men, families with multiple children. I don't think there's any stretch of the imagination to say this also had to be well over 10,000 people who are fed in this episode. So, again, we're going to still say that, right? We're still going to talk about the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. But always remember, the accounts clearly indicate that there are way more people than that got fed in each of these episodes. Now, in this case, they said they had 7 loaves and a few little fish. We don't know how many fish. So in the other episode, 5 loaves and 2 fish. In this case, 7 loaves and a few little fish. So we don't know how many fish there were. But the thing that is amazing is, again, when they got done and when everybody had eaten to their fill, there was more left than what they started with, which is incredible. So let's skip over to Mark's account just to pick up one thing. In Mark chapter 8, I like the way it's said in Mark chapter 8, verse 4. Let's read verse 2, Mark 8, verse 2. I have compassion on the multitude because they have now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for various of them have come from far. And his disciples answered him, from whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? And then he asked them, how many loaves do you have? And they said 7. What's kind of amazing to me is the disciples had already seen the previous episode, right? They had already seen him feed this is a big crowd. They had already seen him feed a crowd bigger than this. And they're saying, where are we going to get food like that? Where are we going to get? From whence? From where? Where can we go to get enough food to satisfy all these men here in this wilderness? We're not in town. Even if you're in town, it's going to take a lot of money to buy that much bread. But we're out in the middle of the woods. How are we going to get enough bread to feed? Does that amaze you that the disciples who had not that long before seen him feed an even bigger crowd miraculously, and then to ask that question? I believe that this helps to illustrate a point that we make pretty often, that even the apostles were still struggling to get it all together. As we sometimes say, they were having trouble connecting the dots. Why wouldn't they have said, well, Lord, there's not much here, but we've seen you do better than this in the past? They're still struggling, aren't they? Their faith is still not where it needs to be. They're not really getting it all together. Any thoughts on that?
They see, but they don't see.
Yeah.
That's just like that other narrative here in Mark we went over a few weeks ago here from verse 22 on about the blind man. When he looked, he saw they looked like trees forming up.
Yeah.
But they could see, but they couldn't. Here's an example right here. They just didn't.
They can see it, but they're not seeing it. Seeing it, but not seeing it. Right, I think you're right. Other thoughts, anybody? All right. And again, in this instance, how much was left over? 7 baskets on this occasion were left over. Again, way more. They had 7 baskets full when they had started out with just 7 loaves. to start with. So, and again, an amazing miracle, a feeding of a big crowd of people. All right, we got done a little early. Anybody have any additional thoughts on any of that, or maybe something else in regards to the miracles of Jesus? Carol?
Jesus actually recommended them a little later on in this chapter 8, where he asked them, do you still not understand?
I'm trying to think, what verses is that, Carol? In chapter 8, when they said, he said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Where is that? Verse 15. So this is Mark 8, verse 15. He charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he said to them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not, having ears, hear ye not, and ye do not remember. When I break the 5 loaves among the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They said unto him, 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They said, 7. And he said to them, how is it that you do not understand? So good point, Carol. He's thinking they ought to do better. It's reached a point now where they need to be making sense of all of this. All right, so we'll just emphasize again something that we've been emphasizing throughout our study of these miracles. And that is that the miracles served the very specific purpose of revealing Jesus to be the only begotten Son of God and confirm that to be true. The miracles always had a purpose. They weren't just miracles for miracles' sake. They always had a purpose. That's really, really important. JD?
Yeah, I mean, something I thought about when we talked about this tonight that I didn't really think about reading these stories before is applicable to us today. It's kind of the importance of how, we come to worship and what our mindset is. Because you've got the example of some people came and they were truly there because they wanted to learn, they wanted to hear what Jesus had to say. But then some other people had the wrong motivation. And so even today, even if, you're not trying to draw people in with something, I mean, somebody could like to come here because it makes their family happy, or they have friends here and they like to chit chat. So I mean, even without offering things to attract people, you could still have motivations to be here for the wrong reasons. And you saw that displayed with those crowds. And so it shows the individual responsibility that everybody has to make sure that you're approaching it in the right way.
I think that's a really good point. No, it might not be loaves and fishes, but so here's a boy, and he's got designs on this girl. He's going to church because he's trying to make good impression on the girl, Well, he's not there for the right reason. And so there could be all kinds of corrupt motives. The singular right motive is to learn and obey the will of God. Good point. Anybody else have a thought? All right. We've got just a few minutes left. Chat quietly amongst yourselves.